Merry Christmas again. Jeff here again. Um, this time I thought I would talk about some of the challenges that come with adopting a child, specifically some of the issues that the children bring with them that need to be addressed. Obviously, there are a variety, and probably if you've done any research on adoption, you've heard about them. And they may have frightened you, and some of them certainly can be frightening. One doesn't know anything about the medical background of the child's family, and oftentimes they come with behaviors that manifest themselves in ways that hadn't been seen before, and that suddenly the new parent is confronted with. When I went through my adoption class, we had a lady come in with her daughter, who was probably about 12 or 13. She'd had her for about 3 or 4 years, and she talked about the time her child attacked her, jumped on her back, and bit her. And this was not something that she was led to expect. So those are some of the kinds of things that one hears about with adoptive children. Nevertheless, these kids are in such a need for love and care that any kind of a sacrifice that one has to make for them is worth it. Robert, my son, who's now 20, is, for those of you who know him, a marvelous young man, very kind, very hardworking, very sensitive, and a young guy with his own issues too, with his problems that he faces and things that he needs to work on. But overall, I am thrilled at where he is in his life at the age of 20. For those of you who don't know, Robert is a special needs guy, and he has certain developmental disabilities that he has had to face, which make him a special needs guy. One of them is his cognitive ability, and he is in what we would call the mild range of cognitive disability, meaning he's very high functioning. He can read, he can write, he can do math, he can even drive a car. He can do a great deal. In fact, he's had a job now for almost 2.5 years. And he's had a girlfriend for over a year, which thrills me to death. He also came with some of the other conditions that many children have, regardless of their status as being adoptive or born or having any other kind of developmental disability. He came to me with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, with obsessive compulsive disorder, and with Tourette's syndrome. He was also supposed to have something called reactive attachment disorder. The research that I did at the time led me to believe that if this was a true disorder, it hadn't been fully fleshed out either for diagnostic purposes or for treatment purposes. And when I spoke to a woman who was going to provide treatment for this, the description of what she wanted to do as treatment sounded to me like child abuse. And so I told her no, I was not going to subject a child who'd already gone through so much abuse in his life to this kind of conduct. And if he never attached to me perfectly like a normal child will, well, that would just be that, but I was not going to do that to him. In the end, Robert has attached to me as my son as firmly, as fondly, and as wonderfully as any other child would. And for that, I am very thrilled. The ADHD, the OCD, and the Tourette's, however, were a particular challenge. Some of this can be met with medicine. Some of it cannot. Some of it is socialization, and usually socializing those around him and not him. Tourette's syndrome, if you've never dealt with it, can be kind of challenging. Some children and some people who have it have the kind of iconic version that people hear about where they make vocalizations. They say things, usually inappropriate things. But that is not the majority of Tourette syndrome behaviors. In Robert's case, it was a tic. It was tics involving his sinuses, his throat, his nose and mouth, and he would do things in a rhythmic pattern. So he would cough rhythmically, he would make snorting noises rhythmically, and there was no point in calling this out to him or admonishing him about it, because it didn't work. It would be like admonishing him for breathing or blinking his eyes. But most of this was stress related. So when he would exhibit these behaviors, and he had a few other stress behaviors as well, what I would do is not say anything, but try to look around and see if there was something that was producing stress or anxiety or even excitement, because sometimes it was simply a response to an exciting thing. And in those situations, good on him, have fun. Otherwise, I let it alone. Unfortunately, other people don't understand that and would sometimes try to say something. I was always surprised that people would address him directly while I was there when he was a little boy, and usually in a rude way, in a mean way. Like, cut that out, or what's the matter with you? Stop doing that. And I would be so surprised that they would do that while I was there. And I said, on one occasion it happened in a restaurant, I turned to the man and I said, if you have some kind of an issue with my son, you should really address it to me as his father. And he said, well, you're just ignoring the situation. And I said, no, actually, I'm doing exactly what I need to do in the situation, because my son has Tourette syndrome, and you don't know what that is, and I do, and I know how to treat it, and you don't. And he didn't want to believe me, and I basically had to tell him to either stop bothering my son, or I was going to ask to have him removed from the restaurant. And I'm perfectly willing to do that. I have no fear at all about calling people out who are being abusive towards my son or rude toward my son in any way. The ADHD, there were times I would let Robert off the hook with medication on the weekends, because he took so many medications when he was younger. But oftentimes what it would be like watching a ping pong ball fired from a cannon into a small concrete room. He would just ricochet like crazy. And it got to the point where he would ask me if he could take his medicine on the weekend so that he could do things, so that he could focus. And I said yes, and I said it was up to him. We did it for school, but other than that, it would be his choice, because I wanted him to kind of learn to take some responsibility for dealing with the issue. Happily, he seems to have grown out of that, and now, as a 20-year-old, he doesn't face that. One of the other circumstances of being a child from the foster care system, Robert was in foster care for 6 years and lived in 5 foster homes, is a sense of insecurity. And one of the ways to deal with that insecurity is through the possession of things, having things. And when he was very young, Robert needed those things in order to have a sense of security. So his book bag was sort of a security blanket, and it was filled with stuff. Pens and pencils and protractors and erasers and rulers and all. He seemed to have a fascination or a need for office supplies. And at first I didn't quite understand how this was going to work out, how he was going to manifest this. But it turned out he started stealing. And stealing, for children who've had a long experience of foster care, can be more about having things than having a particular thing of value. So he could be stealing paper clips and eraser tips for pencils, or he could be stealing cell phones or watches or anything else. But the intrinsic value of the cell phone or the watch was no greater than the intrinsic value of the paperclip or the eraser. So how I worked on that issue was I allowed him to make purchases every week at the local dollar store, because it's cheaper that way, of all those things that he felt he needed. And I informed the school that his book bag was not to be changed, not to be emptied, that this was something he needed. They were a little irritated about that because they wanted to teach him how to have a proper book bag, and I was like, no, it's a security blanket right now. We'll worry about how to have a nice, clean, organized book bag later. Right now, he just needs it for security. And that worked. It took many years to get beyond that stage, but it worked ultimately. And I saw that book bag with its contents was an important thing for Robert, and it went with him everywhere he went. It was never very far away from where he was. So when he came home, it was on the sofa or on the floor next to him. And when he went to his room at night to go to bed, it was on the floor next to the bed. So it was something that gave him some sense of security. Now, at his age, he doesn't really need that anymore. And I have several boxes full of markers and pens and pencils and erasers, and I could probably, provide office supplies for several offices for 6 months with all the stuff I've got. But it got him through it, and that was what was important. And when you have a child that faces these kinds of issues, and that one is a particular foster care issue, you have to run interference for them. When you have a child with some kind of a special need, like Tourette syndrome, you have to run interference for them. Because there are going to be people who know better and who feel like they should step in because they see that you as the parent are not doing what you're supposed to do. And I've had to, on many occasions, say, no, I do know what I'm doing. And just because it doesn't look like what you would do with your kid, this is what I need to do with mine. And you need to back off. And if you don't back off, I'm going to get up on my hind legs and bark. And you're not going to like it. But that's what you do. That's what you got to do. And helping a kid grow up who has lived in the foster system is a tremendous responsibility. And when I look at Robert, and I look at what he has suffered in the first 10 years of his life, and how much he has grown, and how much he is capable of, and what he's doing now, I could not be more prouder of him than any father would be of their son. I love my son. I think he's amazing. And even though we have our bad moments, and we have our disagreements, and we have our arguments, he's an amazing kid. He's done amazing things. And God willing, he will continue to do so. So, those are my thoughts on some of the particular challenges faced when adopting a child from the foster system, and in particular what I faced with Robert. And I hope you will agree that dealing with those challenges was worth it, because he is a hell of a young guy. So thanks for listening, and Merry Christmas.